Afternoon. Today's date is the 21st of October, 2017. We're at the Community Media Center in Westminster, Maryland. I am Larry Burbank interviewing Tom Glenn. And Tom, I appreciate you coming by. I knew you traveled quite a ways from your home. So I just want to ask a few questions, and after that I'm going to just open it up to your liking.
Okay, thank you, Larry.
Okay. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in California in 1936, born in Los Angeles, raised in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay. And your current occupation?
Full-time writer.
Full-time writer.
Yeah.
I see you have a book on your lap. Is
Yeah.
that one of your books?
This is my latest book, Last of the Enemies. It is set during the fall of Saigon, which I survived, escaping under fire at the end.
And what does that word in red mean?
Annamese. It's based on the old name of Vietnam, Annam. And when you refer to somebody from Annam, you call them an Annamese.
I see, okay.
But it really means, it's the same thing as Vietnamese.
Sure. Okay. Okay, when you went to Vietnam, how did you go to Vietnam, and who sent you?
Oh boy. The National Security Agency sent me to Vietnam undercover in 1962. I was there on and off for the next 13 years, always undercover. Until 1973, my job was supporting combat units all over the country, both Marine and Army units. I was giving them direct support, intercepting North Vietnamese communications, warning the units they were about to be ambushed, or there's your target over the hill, go get them, whatever it was. And my cover was that I was a member of the unit I was supporting. So you'll find pictures of me in Army enlisted uniforms and in Marine enlisted uniforms. And one of the things that I still get amused about is how much the troops enjoyed my presence. Here I was, a civilian,
Right.
I'd say, undercover, acting like I was one of them. I outranked their commanding officers some of the times. They thought that was hilarious. And they found out that my payroll signature was Thomas L. Glenn III. They thought that was even funnier. So they started calling me TG3. And that became my call sign on the radio when I was calling to the artillery, send the artillery over to such and such a coordinate. So now I have that on some of my shirts, TG3.
So you actually called in fire support?
Oh yeah. Among many, many other things
Right.
I did, yeah. And after 1973, when the troops were withdrawn, I was named the head of the covert NSA operation in Vietnam, National Security Agency. And that fact was classified until the beginning of 2016. I couldn't tell anybody I worked for NSA in Vietnam.
I understand.
I had 43 guys working for me. Their families were living in Vietnam, so was my family, my wife and my 4 children. And they were still there right almost up to the date when Saigon fell. My family got out 20 days before the city fell. And I was still there when the city fell. That's another long story, which I can get into if you want me to.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was the head of the covert NSA operation. I warned the ambassador, Graham Martin, from the intercepted North Vietnamese communications, that the city was going to be attacked.
Right.
We saw them coming south. I followed them from the time that they were in the highlands. They took Ban Ma Thuột. Then they came down, they took Xuân Lộc, just 40 miles northeast of Saigon. That was their last obstacle before they came south to get the city. I was warning the ambassador, they're coming, we've got to call for an evacuation. He never called for an evacuation. He didn't believe me because he had been talking to the Hungarian member of the ICCS, the International Commission for Control and Supervision. That was a group that was set up to monitor the so-called ceasefire in 1973. This guy told the ambassador the North Vietnamese have no intention of attacking Saigon. They want to form a coalition government with all the patriotic forces in the South and rule jointly. And the ambassador believed him in the face of overwhelming evidence I was giving him hourly that the city was about to be attacked. He wouldn't let me evacuate my people. My boss, the Director of NSA, General Lou Allen, sent me a message ordering me to close down the operation, get everybody out before somebody got killed. The ambassador wouldn't hear of it. So I cheated and I stole and I lied to get my people out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Some I sent out on phony business travel, some on what we call TDY, you would understand that.
Right.
Some on fake home leave, still others on trumped up vacations, anything I could think of to get them out of there. And I did. I got all but 2 guys out, 43 guys, I got 41 guys out and all the families out. But 2 guys volunteered to stay with me to the end. I had a communicator who could send and receive messages, and I had a communications maintenance man who could keep the equipment working. Their names were Bob Hartley and Gary Hickman. Their names are declassified now, so I can tell the whole world about these valiant men and what they did. I explained to them the danger. I said we might be shelled. I didn't know what was going to happen. They understood the danger and they agreed to stay with me. And Larry, as long as I live, I'll love those 2 guys.
Right.
For their raw courage.
Sure.
They risked their lives because I asked them to. The attack started on the evening of the 28th of April. I was in the men's room. It was about 6 o'clock at night. A little earlier than that. It was before sunset. And I was standing in front of the urinal when the wall in front of me swung out as if to slap me down and went slap back into place again. An explosion almost knocked me off my feet. Any sensible person would have taken cover, but I didn't. I was an intelligence officer. I had to know what was going on. So I left the men's room. I went out to the western side of the building, unlocked the door, and when I went out into the compound, this was the old MACV building.
I understand.
Then called the DAO building.
Right.
And on that side of the building, the perimeter fence was only 10 or 15 feet away from the door. Sandbags had been piled up there to protect us from shrapnel. And I shaded my eyes against the setting sun to see if I could figure out what that explosion had been. And while I did that, my ears picked up the drone of turbojet aircraft. And I looked up and I saw them, 5 A-37 Dragonfly fighters. And while I watched, they came over the runway of Tuntinyut, went into a dive, and they dropped bombs. Explosion threw me in the air, slammed me to the ground. But I was on my feet and running before they could go into their next pass. Back in the building, locked the door, back to my office. Got into dispatch shortly thereafter telling me that 5 South Vietnamese pilots, some of them trained in the United States,
Right.
had defected to the North Vietnamese side and were now bombing Tuntinyut. That was the beginning. We were bombarded all night long. First rockets, and about 4:30 in the morning, the artillery started. One C-130 transport aircraft on the runway in back of the building was hit. It exploded. One of the buildings in the compound I was in was hit. It blew up. But the worst thing that happened was that one of the gates was hit. I had been out talking to the Marine Guards from the embassy, trading scuttlebutt with them. I wanted to know before the North Vietnamese came through that fence. So did they. I told them everything I knew. They told me everything they knew. 2 of those guys were killed. Their names were Judge and McMahon. They were the last 2 Americans killed on the ground in Vietnam. Long story about a man called Al Gray. He was a Marine. At that point, he was a colonel. I had known Al since he was a captain. He was out in Vietnam too, wandering all over the countryside. So was I. We worked together. Well, when he was a colonel, he showed up at my door right before the fall of Saigon, and told me he was there. He was going to be the guy who was going to get me out at the end. And sure enough, he did. On the evening of the 29th of April, he was there with his Marines. They'd flown in from the 7th Fleet that was cruising out in the South China Sea. And first he got Bob and Gary on a helicopter about 1400 in the afternoon on the 29th, and then that night, in the pouring rain and pitch black, he got me on, not on a big CH-53 helicopter, but on one of the little Hueys, because Air America, the civilian corporation, in Vietnam had been brought in to help in the evacuation. So I got on one of these little Hueys that could only hold 8 or 10
Right.
people. Well, as soon as we were airborne, I saw the tracers coming at us. We took so much lead in the fuselage, I thought we were going down, but we didn't. We made it. And as soon as we were up over to Saigon, I looked down and saw fires burning all over the city. The pilot flew straight out to the 7th Fleet in the dark and the pouring rain,
Mm-hmm.
and he went to the Oklahoma City, the flagship of the 7th Fleet.
I understand.
And he circled, and he circled, and he circled over that ship. And finally, he went down very, very slowly. He landed on the helipad, the floodlit helipad of the ship. And later in the wardroom, he told me that he, a civilian pilot, had never before landed on a ship.
Amazing.
Yeah. I was in really bad shape after that. I could go into that, but the important thing is that Bob and Gary and I got out. All my people got out safely. But we left behind 2,700 South Vietnamese soldiers who had worked with my organization over the years. I did my best to get them evacuated, but the ambassador never called for an evacuation. By the time that he was contradicted from Washington in the wee hours of the morning of the 29th of April, the North Vietnamese were already in the streets of the city, and we couldn't get to those guys anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They were all captured or killed by the North Vietnamese. I'll never get over mourning over them. That's a very long answer to your question.
No, that's excellent. Yes, sir. It really is. That is. So you've got so many experiences that we could talk probably for an hour and a half.
Oh yeah, I think
Easy,
so.
easy. Mm-hmm. Okay. What was the most exciting experience you had with your tour over there? I know you went over as a civilian.
Yeah.
You work for the NSA,
Yes.
and today we have a lot of experiences that we're trying to learn from the Vietnam War. I know when I came home, we were not welcome. And,
Yes.
and did you have some problems with that?
Oh yes. I first went to Vietnam in '62, came back the last time in '75. In between, I was going back and forth constantly. Had 2 full tours there and many, many shorter trips, what we call TDYs.
Right.
So that meant I was regularly coming back from Vietnam with the troops. I was coming in through San Francisco Airport. We'd get off the plane, and then we'd be met by mobs. They would call us butchers and baby killers, and they'd spit on us. And that so sickened my soul. My soul was already so damaged from having been through combat, and then to go through that on top of it. So for decades, I never told anybody I was in Vietnam. It was a shameful thing.
Right.
Then 3 or 4 years ago, I got invited to something I'd never heard of, and that was a welcome home party for Vietnam veterans.
Yes.
And I went to it, and these young kids, college kids, came up and shook my hand, looked me right in the eye, and with a big smile said, "Thank you so much for your service
Right.
and welcome home." And I cried, Larry.
Sure.
First time it had ever happened.
Yes.
And I know how so many guys who were in Vietnam feel about how they were greeted when they came back. And so many of us can't talk about the things that happened there for all those reasons. But I so sympathize with other veterans who have gone through that and to this day can't talk about what happened.
Absolutely.
You asked about the most exciting experience I ever had. I think it was the Battle of Dak To in 1967.
Okay.
That was in the highlands of Vietnam, right along the Laotian and Cambodian border. And I was there to support U.S. forces with the signal intelligence. And the units, let's see if I can remember, it was the 4th Infantry Division and the 175th Airborne Brigade, if I remember right.
I understand.
And I went to the commander of the 4th Infantry Division and I said, "The enemy is just over the hill. There are several divisions there. They're getting ready to attack you. They're setting up an ambush. Warn your guys, it's coming." He didn't believe me. And he didn't take any precautions. Finally, there was big secondary explosion from a B-52 strike right near the town of Dak To. And so he did send a whole battalion out there, a battalion. They ran into these North Vietnamese forces. They were virtually destroyed.
Sure, sure.
Then he believed me after that.
What a hard lesson.
Yeah, and so that led to the Battle of Dak To, one of the bloodiest battles in the war. And that business of not being believed happened so often to me that I developed a term called the Cassandra effect. Cassandra was a Trojan woman who was blessed with the ability to foretell the future and cursed that no one would believe her. And boy, was that my case.
Mm-hmm.
It happened to me at Dak To, it happened to me other places, and it happened to me again during the fall of Saigon when I warned the ambassador and he didn't believe me. And that was probably the most exciting thing I've ever been in. I was right in the middle of that battle.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so any experience that you would want to share with our future generations? Like, you have any statement for our future generations that you would want to share?
Sure. The biggest mistake we made after Vietnam was pulling out and leaving behind all those people who had fought by our side year after year after year, and we simply left them to the mercies of the North Vietnamese. They were killed, they were captured, they were sent to what was really concentration camps. They were called re-education camps, but that isn't what they were. We didn't learn our lesson. We should have learned from that. We did the same thing in Afghanistan. We did the same thing in Iraq. We pull out and we leave behind the people who have supported us. Now the interpreters who worked with us in Iraq and Afghanistan have essentially been abandoned. They're not being allowed to come back to this country. They'll all be killed. Why don't we learn our lesson? That would be the most important statement I could make about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, sir, I want to thank you for taking your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Larry. Thank you.
It's been very, very interesting.
Thank you.
And please thank your family for allowing you to come up here.
Thank you.
And we'll hope to see you again, and I'll invite you to some of our veterans organizations.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.